Doug, let me know if you can hear me. potentially do it with, so they do use the word whippersnapper today, Governor?
I saw you added a little editorial flair to your piece.
Oh, sir, that was very conservative. As soon as you said it, I feel like some strong
Yeah. That's separate.
I'm probably
I was not Trey standing.
Musical chairs action, all right.
There's probably 3 percent say so, but they you know, yes. Like you would know.
It's gone. It's right there. In front of you.
The governor's going to let the Republicans explain it.
Every section.
Hello, can you hear me? Maria?
I live in a town that advertises ship burning as you're driving in.
Yeah, what is the ship burning?
What,
Does that,
What's the ship burning?
the War of 1812?
I'm happy to do a whole press conference on the burning of the ships. Actually, it's our way of celebrating what we call Losers' Day Parade. That the single largest naval loss in American history up to Pearl Harbor happened in the War of 1812. We lost the whole privateer fleet here. British sent Marines up the river and said, they landed before sunrise and said, you have 2 choices. We're burning the colony or we're actually going to burn the ships. So,
He was not selected.
I had to turn this back over. I had to turn the town back over to the British for a very short amount of time. I wasn't that happy.
Way to start off on a strong note, Norm.
But hey, we celebrate everything here, unlike New York. There's a reason why we're the best small town. We celebrate the good, the bad, and the ugly in Essex. So anyway, I'm very excited to be here today. We're just sort of squatting in the Essex Town Hall where I'm the first selectman, and happy to be talking about the rules and the guidelines that PURA, under Chair Gillett, and I think Commissioner Bukowski is here also. I don't think the 3rd member, Mike Karen, could make it today. But we're here and very excited to talk about performance-based rate making, which was a very integral part of our bill that we did almost 3 years ago after Hurricane Isaias. We did take back our grid, and there were a bunch of things where we felt that the utilities sort of fell short, and we came up with a comprehensive bill, and a linchpin of that bill was performance-based rate making. And PURA has been working on guidelines for that. The utilities have said that they're supportive of it. We want clear metrics for them to perform better, certainly after emergencies, and that's what this is about. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Chair Gillett.
Thank you so much, Senator Needleman, and thank you for welcoming us to Essex. I'm so glad to be here with everyone this morning. So a little over 2.5 years ago, as the Senator was just mentioning, landmark bipartisan legislation known as the Take Back Our Grid Act was enacted and signed into law by Governor Lamont. Among many things, the legislation captured the governor's and the legislature's collective vision that we should be evolving our regulatory model into something that only one state ahead of us has accomplished, fully transitioning into regulating the utilities based on their performance and not just on what they spend. So the transition to performance-based regulation, or PBR for short, is an enormous undertaking. And as I mentioned, there's relatively few examples to look to. So Connecticut is doing what we do best. We're leading by example under the governor's leadership. Over the past few years, PURA has gathered together representatives of the business community, low-income, environmental advocates, state agencies such as DEEP and the Office of Consumer Counsel, and the utilities. We issued several staff concept papers, we held 4 stakeholder workshops, several more public listening sessions, we offered additional opportunities for comment. All of this culminated in this morning's decision, which was the final decision in phase 1 of PBR. What PURA concluded through the process is simple, albeit of course challenging to implement. In short, there is an imperative for regulatory reform to better serve the public interest. Historically, all across the nation and really across the world, monopoly utilities are governed by what is referred to as cost of service regulation. In basic terms, cost of service regulation is a form of price setting where the regulator determines the revenue requirement of the monopoly utility based on what is necessary for the utility to recover its costs and earn a reasonable rate of return. Cost of service regulation really revolves around a utility's perspective on what it means to provide service to its captive customers. There's little to no consideration of what outcomes or value a customer is deriving from that service, and rather the focus is on compensating the utilities for its investments. Conversely, in a stark departure from that mindset, PBR is instead premised on compensating the utility based on its progress toward identified goals, outcomes, and considerations. PBR can provide both a carrot and a stick approach in driving toward the identified outcomes by incentivizing or disincentivizing a utility's specific performance. So today's decision represents a reset of the regulatory framework in Connecticut. It memorializes the goals, outcomes, and considerations that will drive consideration of all future electric utility regulation matters in the state. Moving forward, utility expenditures will be viewed through the lens of whether they further the following regulatory goals. Does it incentivize excellent operational performance? Does it drive towards achievement of public policies? Does it empower our customers and achieve customer satisfaction? And lastly, but most importantly, does it provide reasonable, equitable, and affordable rates? The utility's performance will be evaluated against their contributions to achieving 9 priority outcomes that stem from those goals. So business operations and investment efficiency, comprehensive and transparent system planning, distribution system utilization, reliable and resilient electric service, social equity, greenhouse gas reductions, customer empowerment, quality customer service, and affordable service. So over the next year, PURA will continue its robust stakeholder engagement efforts to finalize those carrots and sticks that are going to be used in incentivizing and penalizing the utilities based on their performance. Today's decision outlines those specific next steps and the associated process that goes along with it, which we expect to have substantially complete by the middle of 2024. In conclusion, I want to thank the tireless efforts of our stakeholders in engaging with us in this process, as well as the commendable efforts of PURA staff, led by our Managing Director of Technical Staff, Josh Ryer, who's here with us today. I look forward to everyone's continued engagement in the transformative process, and I want to thank and commend this governor and this team of leaders from the legislature for their vision and for their continued support of these efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Gillett, and I can't emphasize enough how groundbreaking this actually is and how important it's been for this committee and the prior committee to make sure that not only does this get implemented, but that we implement more guidelines for our regulatory authority to act within. So Senate Bill 7 is an attempt to do that. More is coming out on that bill. We're going to have new drafts, but that further enhances a lot of this in a lot of ways. And I just feel personally, being the only member of the committee leadership that carried forward from when we passed this law. First of all, I want to thank the former leadership for passing a bill that had unanimous approval in the Senate, and I think only had 2 or 3 members that voted no in the House. We feel it's not an attempt to hurt the utilities. The utilities are there to serve the public. We need to constantly remind people of that, and our job is to make sure that they work within the guidelines that are appropriate to both convince the people of the state of Connecticut that they are doing that, and to make sure that we have a good framework in which they can operate. So with that, I'm gonna request that my colleagues on the committee say a few words. My new co-chair, Representative Steinberg, followed by Senator Fazio, and then Representative Buckman.
Thank you, Senator Needleman, and I will start by also thanking him for the continuity he's provided and for initiating the legislation during the special session 2 years ago that have led us to this point. We made a commitment to Connecticut ratepayers, not just after major storms, not just for the current pain we're all feeling because of high rates, but for the long term. I view this bill as more evolutionary than revolutionary. You heard Chair Gillett talk about the very specific sections. They're all intended to further take us down the path to performance-based, very much like results-based accountability and budgeting. We should have clear targets, and the compensation should align with that. The fact of the matter is, we need an effective partner in the utilities themselves if we're going to achieve our goals going forward. Not merely managing supply, but also making huge investments in the transmission network. Much of the great work that PURA has done have been around the electric grid and the other challenges facing us, not just specific to Connecticut, but for the entire region, and in many cases, the entire country. We need to establish a framework that we can live with going forward, which gives PURA the tools to assure that we're adhering to a performance-based methodology and that allow us to achieve the goals that PURA, through its dockets, has set out for us. I view this as a journey, as a path. We're not there yet. It's going to take a long time. One can argue that the existing regulatory framework may not work for us in the long term, but we made significant progress along this pathway, and I am now more confident than I've ever been that PURA, and to some degree DEEP as well, have the tools they need to look out for our interests. And that's really what promise we made to the ratepayers in the first place. Put it over to Senator.
Thank you, Senator First Selectman, for welcoming us to Essex. Thank you to the Governor and Chair Gillett for their strong leadership. It is simply common sense that we as consumers in this state pay for quality, pay for results, rather than simply paying for the costs incurred. It is an innovative approach to regulating our utilities that we're implementing PBR, but it is the type of innovation that I think the residents of Connecticut want to see in their state government. It will be a hard road ahead, and it's going to take an enormous lift from Chair Gillett, from the commissioners, from the entirety of PURA in order to implement it. But it is necessary, especially in light of some of the storms that we've seen in recent years. And hopefully it could provide a roadmap for the rest of the country as well. Paying simply for costs does run the risk of having high costs, and we have high costs for energy here in Connecticut. Obviously, performance-based regulation is the product of good quality bipartisan legislation in the Take Back Our Grid Act from a couple of years ago. Hopefully we have even more positive bipartisan legislation coming forth this session, including SB 7, and in coming years as well, that provide the tools for PURA to provide strong oversight in defense of consumers, as well as lowering costs and improving reliability in the long run, as well as protecting our environmental interests. So this is a first step. I certainly commend PURA and Chair Gillett for their work on performance-based regulating in support of our consumers, and I look forward to the additional work that we will all collaborate together on in order to lower costs, protect consumers, and ensure the reliability of our electricity grid for years to come. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's kind of a solemn room, isn't it? It's so quiet. It's like it's a church service about to start here or something. Mr.
I can do that.
I'm going to pass. But thank you for inviting all of us out here to Essex. It's a quaint, cute little community here. It's maybe second, third best or something like that as far as towns go in the state. But it's also very difficult to follow what was just said. And there's a reason for that. The chairs, the other ranking member, myself, have had a lot of discussion amongst each other. We've had a lot of communication, and a lot of communication with Commissioner Gillett, the governor's office as well. And I think that's the one thing I want to touch on that Senator Fazio mentioned, is that we all are working together on this. It feels like we're putting politics aside and putting policy in place that makes sense for the state of Connecticut. Number one, yes, we want to make sure, we've heard about the three-legged stool 100 times over. Which we keep hearing about the three-legged stool. I'm going to pass on those jokes. But the importance of that reliability, to me, buckets with accountability. And that accountability is not just for each of our utilities. That accountability falls on us too. And we need to make sure that accountability is there for them, for us, and for every single consumer in this state. I think that those are the three pieces in reverse order, right? We need to make sure that consumer is getting a better price than where they're at right now. We have a big problem there. We have a huge problem there. We have upset people, right? And I think the only way that we can do our part in all of this is the collaborative ability to work together. And I think we've shown that this year. I'm actually very encouraged by it. In every piece of what was said, I'm not going to go into all the weeds, all the details, but I will say that I'm encouraged by it, and I truly look forward to what we're going to be seeing coming forth in the additional language from SB 7. It's going to be a lot to it, but I'm looking forward to getting into every single piece of that as we get to the floor, and very, very proud of Commissioner Gillett. I want to put that out there especially. She's done a great job with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill, and I do want to say, best small town in America. Books have been written about it.
That's adorable.
Bill has suggested that Essex can fit inside the park that he runs in Milford. I think we're a little bigger than that, but probably not much bigger. That's 'cause there's not much going on in Milford. No. Friendly banter. And without any further ado, first of all, I do want to thank my staff from Town Hall that's here today. Marissa Gillett, who helped set this up, along with other people here, and very excited to meet the governor. And with that, I want to introduce Governor Lamont.
Thank you. Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm missing something. I've been doing this for 5 years, but you're all the microphones, you guys. I'm just saying. I got to say to each and every one of you, Marissa, you taking the lead here. This is something that is long overdue. And to you, Jack and Mike, and unanimous decision here. We're talking about bipartisan. I like what's going on PURA as well. Let me just back up for 1 minute. Marissa, I think, has been thinking about this for many years. You just don't get paid an automatic 9% whether you do good work or bad work. You get paid for doing good work. And in my world, you get paid a little extra for doing really good work, and you get paid a lot less for not doing really good work. And I think that's in part what performance-based regulation needs. What do I mean by good work? And what do I mean by performance-based? And what do we want to accomplish? Number one, as a governor, I want to keep the lights on. I don't want that to be guaranteed. Number two, I want to make sure that if there's a severe storm or an outage, we have the reliability to get things back up as soon as possible. You heard from Norm, what a wake-up call ICO was. And I saw that this is just not a nice to have, but electricity was absolutely vital to those folks in nursing homes whose generators were running out of juice. And to be blunt about it, I thought Eversource's response was pretty shoddy that day. And I was right on the front lines there, as was Marissa and PURA in general. Number three is just customer service. It's just communication and getting the word out to people, especially at a time of emergency like that. And broadly speaking, this is all in an environment where we're trying to bring down our carbon footprint and look out for the next generation here in Connecticut. So those are the broad goals that I define as performance and holding down rates in a way that makes this a lot more affordable. And I want those goals to be aligned. I want to make sure the utilities have incentives alongside what we want to have accomplished. And I think that's what performance-based regulation means, making sure that our incentives are aligned. Look, after ICEA, you know, everybody was mad, off with their heads, biggest fine in the history of the state. And, you know, that's one way to guide behavior. But I think, as you heard from a number of the speakers, this is evolutionary, Jonathan said, and we're working to make sure our incentives are aligned, so we're working together towards these same goals that I just tried to outline. And I heard a lot about the stakeholders and all the groups that are represented. I like to say one other stakeholder ought to be in the room, and that is the utilities. And I say that, you know, we're not friends, we're not enemies, we're frenemies perhaps. Not always going to be on the same side when it comes to rates, but by the same token, we've got to work side by side to get these things accomplished, or it's not going to work. And I've been on both sides. I'm a governor now, and I'm doing everything I can to fight like hell for the ratepayers of the state of Connecticut. I also have been on the other side, and I've been in front of your predecessor, DPUC, as a cable operator, and I had people explaining my business to me. And there was a little bit of tension there as well, let me tell you. And I think what you do with performance-based regulation is you set the broad goals. This is what we want to have accomplished. I'm not telling you how to do it. In fact, you're probably better at figuring it out. Tell us how you want to do it. I'm not telling you how many remote status monitoring systems you have to set up and then what type of segmentation. You're better at doing that. I'm just telling you that if it's this level storm, I want to make damn sure that everything's up and operating in the most dangerous facilities, you know, within a reasonable period of time, or there'll be a price to pay. To me, that is what performance-based regulation is. I look forward to working with all the players here at this table. I also look forward to working with the utilities to make sure that we can get on the same page, row in the same direction, and make sure the performance is appropriately rewarded when it deserves to be rewarded, or otherwise when it doesn't. Thank you. Any questions for Marissa?
Yeah. Seriously, direct everything to Marissa.
How much pushback are you getting from the utilities?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think both Avangrid and Eversource are on the record in terms of offering their broad brushstroke support for performance-based regulation. You know, this is a classic case of the devil's in the details, and you know, certainly I'll let them speak for themselves in terms of which aspects they wish we had handled differently. You know, certainly we will continue to work with them as the governor has asked us to, and I would expect them to comply with the decision that we've issued today.
Well, Avangrid said in their response on your docket that there's an inherent inconsistency in push for high standards and the lowest possible rates, and that's an element of PBR. Would you address that?
I can. So I think as, you know, I've been careful to say over the past 4 years since the governor recruited me to this position, that what we're really focused on is delivering value for what our customers are paying. So I think whether, you know, certainly there's a lot more investment that needs to happen in the state. We have aging infrastructure, and we need additional infrastructure to support our aggressive goals in this state. So we're not going forth with the expectation that additional investment is not necessary, but rather we're ensuring that what is invested and what the utilities are recovering is delivering value, which is measured by performance. And I don't see any inherent conflict in that. You know, certainly the utilities in this state and across the world are used to being compensated simply for what they put into the ground. And now we're saying what you put into the ground has to achieve the goals and objectives that we've outlined for you as a condition, you know, being reimbursed for those expenditures. So I don't see any inherent conflict, and I would invite them to further articulate it.
Well, Eversource in their reply took issue with what they say is PURA's view that the current system, there's a capital bias, that there's too much emphasis on capital expenditures as opposed to operating expenditures and performance. And you just said there is significant need to modernize the grid. So again, are there any inconsistencies or at least tensions in this newer approach and those significant needs that you just articulated?
Sure. I will start by recognizing that there are, of course, tensions in what we're putting forward. The whole reason that you have PURA, and every state has a PURA, is that we are designed to bring the expertise through the commissioners and our staff that is necessary to draw out the best from conflicting viewpoints. So I think it would be a mistake to say that there's no tension. In fact, I think a lot of what we've done under my tenure has been to embrace that tension and use it to propel us forward. So capital bias is something that the Office of Consumer Counsel brought to our attention and really contributed to this docket. And the concept is that the utility industry is biased towards investing in capital expenditures as opposed to efficiencies or other approaches to doing their job. And so as soon as we all recognize that there is a bias towards investing in more money, because that's investing in more capital expenditures rather than operationalizing those efficiencies and optimizing what's out there. As soon as we recognize that utilities are driven towards investments under the current framework as a way for them to make their money, the sooner that we can move into this new structure where, sure, you can invest in capital, there's a great need for that, but we are no longer going to compensate you just for spending the money. Now you have to achieve the metrics that go along with those expenditures.
So the legislature did take back the grid in 2020 after I say this. PURA this morning approved a final decision, although the word final, I guess, is advisable. So what is it, but yet implementation now is not expected until the spring of 24. So what needs to happen between now and then? What don't we know, and what will happen between now and then that we will finally see, aha, this is how things are going to be done differently?
Sure. So phase 2 of the proceeding, which is detailed in the decision that we issued this morning, lays out the 3 dockets that we have to undertake to get us from here to implementation. So it says we've identified that there are performance mechanisms, revenue adjustment mechanisms, and integrated distribution resource planning. Those 3 separate buckets, you can think of them as subfolders within a folder, more specified scopes. Those are the actual mechanisms by which you financially incentivize or disincentivize the utilities. So now that we have the goals identified and the priority outcomes identified, we can literally set up the financial mechanisms that are targeted towards achieving those outcomes.
And so what are the consultants going to do then, in a couple of sentences?
So this is a stakeholder engagement process. So in short, the consultants facilitate that engagement process. We're engaging with the members of the business community, our ratepayer advocates, environmental advocates, and essentially they're going to, we've already completed a survey of the mechanisms that we have on the books today. And now we're going to spend the next year figuring out how you can layer on new incentive mechanisms and how you can tweak the existing ones specifically to achieve those outcomes.
Governor, Commissioner Gillett, I think by design has been somewhat of a disruptor. She has changed how PURA does its business. There is not the same reliance that a certain commissioner will always take certain kinds of cases. Eversource in their Aquarian case has pushed back very hard. They've accused the chair of using that case to make an example of them and reducing the rates. So that's just a preamble to the question of what do you want PURA at this point to be seen as a disruptor, as upending what has been the standard operating procedure for a long, long time?
I think I do. I mean, I think performance-based regulation is disruptive. It totally changes the dynamic about how our utilities are compensated. But I'll back up. You were just saying, hey, there's a prejudice towards capital and not towards operating. I think of Marissa and Jack and Michael, maybe they're going to come forward and say, I want to make sure that in all these most vulnerable communities, I am guaranteed that power come back on within a certain specified period of time. Then it's going to be up to the utilities to say, that means I need more staff on call, ready to respond, and operating expense. Or they say, I want more remote status monitoring, which means people can get the trees off the wires faster. Or maybe they say, I'm going to bury all the utility wires, only costs about $15 billion, but that'll mean trees don't take down wires at that point. But those are the type of decisions you can only make in collaboration with the utilities. But the fundamental disruptor is the idea of performance-based regulation. I think everybody here is unanimous. This is a
Two of the three
disruption that's long
commissioners
overdue.
are serving on expired terms. So can you tell us what it is you want to see before you make a decision about whether or not Commissioner Bekowski and Commissioner Karen should get new terms?
Well, I guess I should probably talk to them first of all and see if they want to stay. I think they've served this state very well. They bring a lot of history and knowledge to the PURA board. You know, maybe a little more history, maybe a little more disruptive over here. Maybe that's not a bad combination.
Well, her term expires in 2024, right? And this process will still be ongoing. So have you made a decision about what kind of continuity you would like to see in the leadership of PURA regarding Commissioner Gillett and perhaps...
I don't think it's a very good idea to disrupt right in the middle of this disruption. I think the idea of having some continuity there makes an awful lot of sense.
Mark, could you get a little bit into what you want to see ultimately from SB 7?
Sure, but I do want to react to some of the questions that have been asked, and I'm not the appointing authority of anybody, so it's easy for me to say, I think that disruption in this industry is good. Look, I'm pragmatic and I'm a capitalist. I'm not going to fault these companies for making a large profit. They do, and that's okay. As long as the ratepayers of the state feel satisfied with the product that they got. Marissa and the governor have been very, very clear that it's about value and it's about what our expectations are. And I think that if you sort of filter through the noise around every time the rate goes up because of deregulation and the supply rates go up, people get angry. Nobody actually ever acknowledges that the rates go back down in July usually. We have a winter issue. But I think if you polled the public, there's a lot of dissatisfaction out there when you filter through the noise. And I think we've listened to that. My colleagues who were the former leadership of the committee, my colleagues who are now the leadership, the governor and PURA, and to a large extent DEEP have reacted in an understandable way. We're all a bit frustrated. I'm going to just sort of give you an example. The morning that people were testifying about SB 7, telling me that everything in that bill was wrong, bad, unconstitutional, materially going to impact their business performance, they announced record-breaking earnings the same morning. And 2 days later, major increases in salary for their senior managers, their CEO. And I'm happy that they make good salaries. And I'm happy that they're healthy and they're highly rated in the bond market, so they get the best value for the best cost of capital rates. But I also know that the reason I became chair of this committee was because as a first selectman and as a selectman before that, we went through storm after storm after storm where I felt that the performance was bad. And I looked at the staffing levels of on-the-ground people, and I felt that they were beginning to weigh themselves higher in the staff and lower in the people who do the work. And I think in the decision today, you saw a great acknowledgement that the people that are on the ground work like crazy to get things back on track. But we have, in my opinion, an over-reliance on contractors and not enough people that actually work for the utilities as line people, as people on the ground. How that got to be, we can talk a lot about it, but the reality is the frustration and then the what I perceived as unforgivable performance in and after ECES was what led to this. And I think that we will get to the point where hopefully the public feels better served. And I think that the only way we would have gotten there is if the governor had made this decision to hire somebody who was a professional regulator, who was going to come in and actually disrupt the process. And I don't see disrupting it as bad. I see the dynamic tension which exists in every business between sales and manufacturing. It exists all the time between finance and the other parts of the businesses. I see that as being a good thing, and it comes with healthy outcomes. And I see us looking to move forward in SB7 with improving that climate and making the residents of the state of Connecticut feel that we're on their side and that we're looking to move things more in their direction and not in the other direction. And I fear, learning what I have about public utilities throughout the country, that that having professionalism in the regulatory agency is really critical. I really do.
So,
How would this type of regulation have affected the rate hike approval this past winter, or would it have?
So the rate hike that our residential customers experienced in January was a rate hike on the supply side. So the supply side of customers' bills is not regulated by PURA at all. It was deregulated in 1998 by the legislature. With that being said, we have evaluated in performance-based regulation, and there's certainly a component of SB7 that looks at this in terms of, excuse me, really focusing in on what we think the utilities could do and what's within their control, and encouraging efficiencies within their procurement processes and ensuring that the utilities whose sole job right now is on the supply side is to competitively procure that product and then not mark it up when they pass it through. So PBR, certainly there's a role within PBR to push the utilities in spots where they've previously argued they have, it's outside of their control. In fact, I think the actual procurement and driving them towards efficiencies in that procurement is something that PBR could play a role in. But by no means do I want to suggest that the January 1st rates would not have happened under PBR, because it's essentially a portion of the bill that is not regulated by PURA.
And was it brought up by Eversource? Like you said, you'd like to see it not, procured and then raised?
Sure. So the utilities under deregulation procure the electricity on the competitive market on behalf of standard service customers. It's a default product. Customers can certainly shop for a supplier on the supply side today. And what the utilities put in front of us for January were the rates that they procured from the competitive market. And we've been on a journey over the past couple of months talking to our partners in other states, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, to see how they run their procurements in those states. I think there are still efficiencies to eke out of the process, and that's what I think PBR could assist with moving forward.
You outlined the pillars, kind of the goals of it, but what are how do you measure that, whether utilities reach that goal or not?
It's a great question. So that is part of phase 2. So we have a companion docket called the Equitable Modern Grid Proceeding. It has 11 tracks. 9 of the 11 have been completed in the past couple of years. I'm going to take an example from that. The 8th track is focused on reliability and resilience. It set up a whole framework, metrics, data that have to be recorded on the front end and then on the back end and along the way. So how you marry that to PBR is we've set up metrics in that separate docket. So say, their current duration of outages is 100 minutes a year. we'll say we want a 5% improvement in that year over year. So you set really concrete metrics, and then in PBR through phase 2, you could look at that and say, you know, if they hit within X percentage of that goal, they would achieve X profit. If they fall under it, then they would have a penalty. Like, that's a very basic example of how this could work, but that's the whole idea around phase 2, is we take those priority outcomes, we marry them up to metrics we've established elsewhere, and then we define what the dollar amount incentive or penalty is that pairs to each of those objectives.
How will this impact the relationship with the credit markets? I mean, that's an element of the Aquarian case, which is now in court, so I don't know if you feel constrained about addressing that, but there's been strong pushback that this could jeopardize the ability of Aquarian and its parent company, Eversource, to go to markets to meet certain capital needs.
I would start by fully rejecting that argument.
Where you stand?
I would point back to what the senator said a moment ago. You know, the sky was falling when Take Back Our Grid Act was passed. Just like the, you know, Aquarian and their parent company Eversource is arguing the sky is falling in their appeal. And I think the numbers don't bear that out. Their earnings per share took a 2-cent hit for a week or something. Like that, and frankly, it's not my concern what their shareholders make. It's my concern what the cost of debt is and how that factors into rates. You know, I think some of those allegations are troubling at best. And when you look at the numbers from the Aquarian case, when all is said and done, we reduced their current revenue requirement by $2 million. Now, if the sky is falling from $195 million a year to $193 million a year, whatever the exact numbers were, as part of a company, a parent company that has access to multi-billion dollars of working capital, I think we have different issues that we need to address. And I just stop where I started, which is I reject in full their premise.
I want to follow up with that because it's really an important question. If every time the utilities get dinged, they turn around and say this is affecting our cost of capital, but there's a benefit to the ratepayers on the other side in rate reduction or no rate increase, how do you measure, you know, there's sophisticated calculations, I'm sure that can be done, and say, well, if they're paying 5 basis points more for their money, because they're not going to get capital, right? So what's a 5 basis point hit on their actual bond cost versus what it is, what the difference is to the ratepayer that gets their bill every month? I think it's really kind of a fallacious argument. I'm going to be a little less delicate than the good chairperson. I think it's a lot of crap. So sorry.
Good question,
we're not materially impacting their bottom line. Look at what just happened. I mean, their profits went up from 1.2 billion to 1.4. And I want them to be healthy. I want them to get the best possible value for the capital. But again, the dynamic tension between shareholders and ratepayers is what we're concerned about. Our concern is on the side of the ratepayers, not on the return on investment for their shareholders, right? They seem to do pretty well. In my opinion of the pyramid of public utilities is that it starts with shareholders, goes to senior managers, and then on the ground employees and ratepayers sort of are in the equation somewhere, but they're not the bottom of the pyramid that they build up to profit. In the capitalist world that I operated in, my focus is I gotta satisfy my customers, I gotta make my employees feel like they wanna work here, and then anything that comes out of that flows up to the executives and the shareholders, not the other way around.
Governor, you are something of a capitalist. Do you agree with Senator Needleman that this concern is crap?
He's much more.
But I don't think there's an increasing credit risk to lending money to Eversource or UI because of this. It just says the rate of return of their shareholders may go down a little bit. It's still a very solid credit risk. I don't worry as much about that. I'll tell you what I do worry about. If I'm Pedro or Joe, I've got several places I can deploy my investment money. And I'll probably want to deploy my investment money where I think I get the highest rate of return. So I was, very happy to know that Marissa is also talking to places like Massachusetts and New Hampshire to make sure that we're along the same lines or thinking along the same way in terms of performance-based regulation, so we're not a total outlier there.
You were just referring to the leaders of Avangard and Eversource?
That's right.
Okay, thank you. Just some random page. How does what happened today inform SB 7? This has been kind of an unusual process that they've kind of gone down the track at the same time to a certain degree. So how does it change or how does it not change SB 7?
So we've really named SB 7 Take Back Our Grid Part 2. I mean, there's a lot in there. There's a lot of parts that we think are successor ideas to what we did in Take Back Our Grid. And I think that this just is the major hurdle that came out of Take Back Our Grid Part 1, but there's more work to be done. And again, I want to emphasize, I don't care if people make a lot of money. I just care that the ratepayers and the residents of the state of Connecticut feel that they're getting the most value for their money. So I look at my job, and I think my colleagues do in the legislature, and I know the governor does, as we want to be the people who are making sure that the people that we care about are feeling that they're vindicated, listened to, get the response that they want. And I think that that's why we keep looking to enhance the regulatory climate here. I think that that's what needs to be done. And I am a big lead by example person. I think that you're finding in the publications around energy that Take Back Our Grid is being cited in many cases. The work of PURA is being cited in many other states as the way we want to go. We learn from them, they learn from us. And I'm all for Connecticut being a leader where it should be a leader. So,
if I could add something, it's one thing for us to pass legislation and for the governor to sign it and for PURA to implement it. It's another important task for us to communicate to the citizens of the state of Connecticut. And I particularly want to thank Chair Gillett and PURA for having gone the extra yard and reaching out to communities, explaining the basics of how PURA operates. We need to do the same thing when this legislation is passed, so people understand the positive impacts that may not be immediate, but will eventually accrue to ratepayers down the road. They'll have a more reliable grid, hopefully at some point a more affordable grid. But this is an important step that needs to be not passed in silence, but communicated over and over again to citizens so they fully appreciate what we're trying to take on here.
Thanks, everybody.
thank you.